we move to our brief talk session. We want to thank all the scholars who submitted their abstract. There were so many, unfortunately, but obviously we have to choose just some of them. So we are going to listen to 3 brief talks today and 3 tomorrow. All the talks cover the topic of the sense of touch, but as you will see, they address this issue from very different perspectives. Just some information. They are all pre-recorded, so they last 10 minutes each, and then we have 5 minutes for a brief Q&A session after each brief talk. So we can start with the first one.
So the first one is Alice Rossi Sebastano. She is a PhD student at Manibus Lab at the University of Turin, Italy. And today she is going to present her talk titled Tactile Routing of the Sense of Body Ownership. Early somatosensory activity predicts the strength of the rubber hand illusion susceptibility.
Good morning, everybody. I am Alice from the Manibus Lab, and today I'm going to talk about the embodiment-dependent modulations of the somatosensory system. An interesting challenge in cognitive neuroscience is to understand the brain mechanism underpinning the ability to perceive our body parts as belonging to our organism, that is, the sense of body ownership. And previous influential models assume that a top-down mechanism of pre-existing body representation may necessarily interact with a bottom-up process of multisensory integration, in which the inputs coming from the different sensory modalities are realigned into a common reference frame in order to give rise to the sense of body ownership. The previous studies have relied mostly on a very famous experimental paradigm, the rubber hand illusion, in which a rubber hand congruently positioned with respect to the participant's body is stroked synchronously with their own hand, which is hidden from view. And after about 10 seconds of this procedure, the participants start to feel as if the rubber hand were their own hand, the so-called embodiment, and as if the real hand were not part of their body anymore, the so-called disembodiment. And within the theoretical framework of the predictive coding theory, the illusory experience of the rubber hand illusion can be explained as the top-down reduction of the prediction errors that come from the multisensory conflict between visual and tactile inputs. Indeed, since among all of the physical objects in the world, it is only our own body that is able to evoke tactile sensations when the person observes visual touches onto the skin. During the rubber hand illusion, when the participant sees visual tactile on the rubber hand, but concomitantly feel tactile sensation onto their own body, a prediction error may emerge. And according to this interpretation, to realign the visual and tactile inputs, the brain may reduce the weight afforded to somatosensory inputs and enhance that afforded to the visual input via a top-down modulation operated by high-order cortices on primary sensory cortices. And in line with this hypothesis, previous evidence have highlighted a greater activation of parietal premotor cortices during the illusion condition, suggesting that these cortices may be responsible for the settlement of the visuotactile conflict. On the contrary, the involvement of primary sensory areas is still controversial. And in a previous study, a behavioral study that we conducted in our lab, we showed a diametrical modulation of visual and tactile detection accuracy following the illusion induction. And this result is in line with the idea that high-order cortices may then regulate somatosensory activity in favor of visual activity. But focusing more on the somatosensory side of the story, the current electrophysiological evidence is controversial because some studies that analyze the EEG activity evoked by the tactile sensation during the illusion suggested that the somatosensory processing may be downregulated in favor of visual processing, highlighting a downregulation of early somatosensory evoked potentials components. On the contrary, other studies found an enhanced amplitude of the somatosensory evoked EEG activity in a long latency range. Thus, there is no agreement neither on the direction of the effect nor on the latency of the modulation. And in our view, this may be because of the methodological choices concerning the stimuli employed to evoke the EEG activity. First, these studies measured the activity evoked by the stimulation that induces the illusion, which is multisensory in its nature because it's visuotactile, thus not purely testing the somatosensory activity. And second, the employment of a number of different stimuli kinds may explain the difference in the latency of the observed effects. So here we measure the median nerve somatosensory evoked potentials following the rubber and illusion induction, and we chose such a standardized measure in order to address the specific latency of the effects. Furthermore, we employed an experimental procedure that allowed us to isolate the somatosensory response from the multisensory confound of the rubber and illusion protocol. Indeed, 17 participants underwent 2 sessions which were identical except for the rubber and illusion stimulation, which could be synchronous, thus eliciting the illusion in one session, and asynchronous, thus not eliciting the illusion, the control condition, in another session. First, the right median nerve motor threshold was estimated in order to set the stimulation intensity at its 110%. And then the stimulation protocol began, in which 12 seconds of rubber and illusion stroking were immediately followed by a train of 10 electrical tactile stimuli. And at the end, embodiment and disembodiment questionnaires were collected. Okay, so as predicted, the results of the questionnaire confirmed that the participants gave higher ratings of embodiment and disembodiment in the synchronous as compared to the asynchronous rubber and illusion. Then, the somatosensory evoked potentials amplitude in the synchronous and the synchronous condition were compared by means of a whole brain matched pairs t-test, point-by-point t-test. But however, this analysis did not highlight any significant difference. And we reasoned that given the high intensity of this tactile simulation, it might be possible that the first stimulus of the train may have interrupted the illusion, thus preventing us from observing any embodiment-related effects. Hence, we performed the very same analysis only on the first stimulus of the train, which was immediately preceded only by the 12 seconds of rubber and illusions, and the results revealed a significant difference between conditions in both an early set component whose latency corresponds to the N60 and in a late set component, the P300, respectively in a centroparietal and in a frontocentral parietal contralateral cluster of electrodes. In both cases, the synchronous condition showed a smaller ERP amplitude than the asynchronous one. Then we performed a Spearman correlation between the mean amplitude of the N60 and that of the P300, the components, and the mean ratings of the embodiment and disembodiment questionnaires separately for each condition. And the analysis highlighted a significant positive correlation between the N60 and not the P300 mean amplitude in the embodiment and disembodiment mean ratings, only in the synchronous condition, highlighting that the early somatosensory processing predicts the body ownership experience. And finally, time frequency analyses were run to compare the alpha and the beta band desynchronization between conditions, and this is considered an index of sensory motor cortices activation. So a whole brain point-by-point test was run to compare the conditions, and it revealed a significant decrease of alpha and beta frequency band desynchronization in the synchronous as compared to the asynchronous condition. So to conclude, both time and time frequency analysis highlighted an embodiment-dependent downregulation of the somatosensory activity in the synchronous as compared to the asynchronous condition. And the correlational analysis suggested that the early somatosensory components that index the activation of the primary sensory somatosensory cortex may play a crucial role in the construction of the body ownership experience. And this is coherent with the behavioral evidence mentioned above, showing a downregulation of somatosensory processing following the rubber hand illusion. And to conclude, the follow-up experiment will consist in collecting visual evoked potentials to explore the visual side of the story. And specifically, we predict to parallel the behavioral results, showing an enhanced amplitude of the visual evoked potentials following the rubber hand illusion induction. I would like to thank the organizers of this fantastic workshop for giving me the opportunity to participate and to talk today. And of course, I would like to thank all of you for your attention.
So thank you so much, Alice. A very interesting talk. So now we have time for questions. So the first question is from Carol Poles. So with respect to the absence of significant differences between conditions, I was wondering whether this could also be related to level phenomena like habituation.
Okay, thank you for the question. This is a very interesting question because, as I was saying before, we explained the absence of a difference when we average all of the 10 stimuli of the train because of the intensity of the stimulation, which could have somehow restore the coherent sense of body ownership over the participant's real hand after the first stimulus of the train, thus making it impossible for us to measure any embodiment-related effects on the following stimuli, but also lower level phenomena like habituation could explain the results, because it is indeed possible that like habituation got the best over the embodiment-related downregulation, and indeed, if you look at the amplitude of the waveforms, the second, the third, and the fourth, and so on, of the stimuli have a smaller amplitude as compared to the first one. So this is an interesting point, but I think that with our current data, we cannot disambiguate between the two possible alternative explanations. But thank you for the question.
Thank you. So the other question is from Stefano Gualtiero. Thanks for the nice talk and results. I think that the idea of further testing your model by recording visual evoked potential is really interesting. How are you planning on implementing this idea in terms of experimental procedures?
Thank you for the question, because it allows me to explain a little bit more about the follow-up experiment. Thank you. Well, actually, we're going to implement the very same experimental procedure of the experiment that I just explained. So the procedures will be identical, but the kind of simulation, the modality will be changed. So we will implement the same protocol of 12 seconds of rubber hand illusion procedure, immediately followed by 10 visual stimuli delivered as brief flashes of red light emitted by a red LED, which will be placed near the rubber hand illusion. So where the visual touches of the rubber hand illusion occur in the procedure. And yes,
Okay. Yes. Thank you so much, Alice.
Cool.
Thank you,
Alice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Thank you too.
Again.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Alice.